Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. There are moments in history, these last 250 years of the United States of America, as a concept, as an exceptionalism. There are moments that you, in review, see there was the danger zone right there. The misapprehension, the miscommunication, the threats, the withdrawal of threats, the confusions, the oversteps. For example, we're told that in the Gulf War I, this is in the 1990s with George H.W. Bush in the White House, Saddam Hussein, in conference with the American ambassador, misheard or misapprehended or he failed to misunderstand in translation that the United States would defend and cared about the sovereignty of Kuwait. That led to a catastrophe in Gulf I, and we know how that it's played out now. Iraq is a sad state, prey to sectarian violence, the attacks of the al-Nusra and al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Levant. Saddam Hussein hanged by his own people in 2006. And not to mention the damage that was done to the United States of America in the Iraq War, 2003 to 2007. That because of the misapprehension of a remark. That's how you have to look upon American history in real time when we debate the remarks made by the President of the United States and the Secretary of State with regard to the alleged incident of chemical warfare, August 21st in Damascus. I welcome Michael Auslin, National Security and Foreign Policy for the American Enterprise Institute, writing most recently several times about this Syrian episode. Why do we go on and on about it? Because American citizens are weighed down by reading our history in the Middle East, in Europe, in Asia, in the Indian Ocean, and a remark by a president can get out of hand very quickly. Michael, a very good evening to you. The president's remarks, Syria, the speech almost a week ago, it's hard to believe that it was that short amount of time. And since then, a stepping back from asking for the authorization of the use of military force in Syria, because of asking Congress for that, because of remarks by the Secretary of State and Foreign Minister Lavrov in Geneva last week, and an apparent agreement, although I don't really see it, Michael. So I come to you now, your measure of this. Is Syria a moment where we're not sure it could get out of hand, where it feels like things are a jumble, sort of like you're hearing that there's bad news and no one's gotten charge of it yet? Good evening to you, Michael.
Good evening, John. I think that the deep concern that you're seeing both at home and abroad is that there is utter confusion on the part of what the administration is trying to accomplish, and that there is not only the sense that you have conflicting parts of the government working against each other. For example, the Secretary Kerry's offhand remark that the Russians jump onto, but that the White House is just quite simply not only not able to keep up with events, but is actively making things worse as the crisis goes on.
Russia and its part in this, Mr. Putin and Mr. Lavrov, is also a mystery. The Kremlin is a non-transparent enterprise. That's its nature. 1,000 years. Okay, I get that. Fine. But it's now being used by the United States, or being asked by the United States, to arbitrate or facilitate a peace deal with a dictator that the United States has declared is a moral obscenity. Unpack that, Michael. Does that tell us that we have a policy and that it's changing, or that what?
Well, I think it is clear that we're being played by the Russians. I mean, it's very hard. Look, what you have is the U.S. government all of a sudden jumping on this lifeline that was accidentally suggested by Kerry, that now the Russians have figured out is really in their interests. I don't understand why anyone in Washington isn't willing to go back, a week or 2 weeks or a month before, and say that before this crisis erupted, we were talking about how fundamentally at odds, President Obama and President Putin were. That this was the worst leader relationship in the world. That we didn't trust what the Russians Russians were doing, and that the president himself had insulted Putin just a few weeks before all this happened. Now suddenly we're supposed to believe President Obama that he's working with the Russians, that he trusts President Putin. I think that it is a White House that is desperately attempting to spin the line that it knows what's going on and it is somehow in control of that process. I think the only answer is that the Russians have figured out that this does two things. Number one, it advances their interests in the Middle East, and number two, it makes them a geopolitical heavyweight again, and we're being played by them all the way down the line.
The president, in his speech to the nation, and I paraphrase, forgive me, but he said, "You didn't make me president to begin wars. You made me president to end wars." That's accurate. I go along with that. And the question here is, we hired the president to do something that is fundamentally the other direction from confrontation with the villains of Damascus and Tehran. And does that mean we need to hire a new president, that we cannot ask him to change course in midstream?
Well, I think that in the case of what President Obama was hoping he would be able to accomplish in the second term, like many second-term presidents, reality has caught up with him. And what you see that I think is most concerning, although it does hit other presidents as well, is this unwillingness to face up to reality and an unwillingness to understand, number one, how badly they've bungled the entire Syria situation, not just the past month, but the past 2 years, so that now you have a rebel body that could be as much as half filled with Islamists because we didn't intervene early on. And then you have this particular subset of the crisis, and the president simply unwilling to acknowledge and recognize that and instead play along with this fiction that the idea that American commitments, American statements and red lines have no real credibility behind them can all be assuaged by going back to a process that we know almost always results in nothing being accomplished, which is the UN. That's where they're now betting this will happen. So the president can say, I haven't started a new war. I've gone to the UN. This is a completely accepted international route. And yet, for those who are actually keeping score, the UN process achieves almost nothing.
Michael, you and I watch the punditocracy. We now and again participate in the punditocracy. And I'm observing from New York. You're observing from Washington. I see a lot of sighing, a lot of disappointment, some people being quiet because they don't want to speak negative. But routinely now, I see folk are registering that they're alarmed, that they know the policy is not shaped, that there's no direction ahead. Do you hear the same thing in Washington, that we're expecting surprises, but we don't know what they are, and nobody likes to be surprised in foreign policy?
No, I think for sure, John, and I think that there is no one, whether Republican or Democrat, who has seen such a hash of both a crisis and a sort of longer-term foreign policy. And you know, it's easy, obviously, to get very partisan, and it's easy for those to jump on people who are dissatisfied with the president to say, well, you know, they always want a military solution. Right. But I think if you talk to anyone who's been in government, out of government, has been in Washington for a while, they are quite simply stunned at what appears to be the level of not just incompetence, but of again, unwillingness to face up to the consequences of what they've done on the part of this administration, and the backpedaling. You know, the story that's now being peddled is that Obama and Putin may have gone back as far as a year ago talking about international control of Syria's chemical weapons. Well, don't forget, less than 24 hours after Kerry's offhand remark, the White House was doing everything it could to distance itself from that remark. When the Russians suddenly provided this potential out, suddenly the White House story changed. And no, this was something that Kerry had been talking with Lavrov about for a week. Now we're supposed to believe that Putin and Obama have been noodling this between them in some form or another for a year. So, you know, there is no one in Washington who gives any credibility to what the White House is saying. And the deeper point is what you've brought out. There really is a fear and a concern that no one knows how this will play out, and that the White House will be able to adequately respond. Because
entering the stage now, with Damascus now identified as cooperative with the Chemical Weapons Treaty and ready to sign on, entering the stage now is the villain itself. That would be Tehran. And Iran is going to play this to their advantage. The Russians might aid them. And I don't know where Mr. Obama's going on this. If he's willing to accept chemical weapons in Syria with the the loose promise that there will be a sign to a treaty. Why wouldn't he do the same thing with nuclear weapons in Iran? I don't have an answer to that, Michael.
Yeah, John, I think, look, for everyone, Iran has always been the long game and the real issue at stake in both Middle East and much broader global and regional peace. But I think there is actually we could make a connection with longer-term American policy and what's happened in North Korea, for example. And this obviously predates the Obama administration, and there is still extraordinary and I think rightful criticism of the Bush administration for inheriting a bad situation and turning it, quite frankly, into a catastrophe. Now you have the same thing happen in Syria. I would not say that the Obama administration wanted to follow the North Korean playbook because everyone knows that failed. But what we have now are two cases in which the United States had real and substantive opportunities to stop a very dangerous and worrisome development in two different countries and failed to do so. I think that cuts to not just the credibility of what we say, but credibility as an actor, which I think is more important than what you say. It cuts to the questions that our allies have about whether or not just whether can the United States be trusted to live up to commitments, but does the United States really know what it's doing in the world? Because now our life going forward in Northeast Asia is all about trying to figure out how do we deal with a nuclear North Korea that we sort of let become nuclear. We're now down that path with a Syria that no one really fully believes is going to give up all of its weapons or declare all of these sites. And that leads it directly to your point, which is the real game at issue, which is Iran. So I think that concern is growing. I think that our credibility, beyond the president's words, much more fundamental credibility is truly at stake. And we are in a most worrisome sense, not learning. We do not have a learning curve in Washington. We are not learning from our mistakes.
Michael Auslin of the American Enterprise Institute. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.